When American conservatives start openly praising a foreign leader over their own president, you know something fundamental has broken in the system. The Carney phenomenon isn't just about one man's competence. It's about the complete collapse of institutional credibility in the United States. I've been observing American political culture for decades, and I can tell you that what we're witnessing with the widespread admiration for Mark Carney among American conservatives represents something unprecedented and deeply troubling. Not because Carney doesn't deserve admiration, but because the fact that Americans are looking to Ottawa for the kind of leadership they can no longer find in Washington reveals how completely our own institutions have failed. The public story, to the extent that mainstream media bothered to cover it, was treated as a curiosity. A few prominent Republicans praising a Canadian politician, some cross-border political commentary. Nothing to see here. But what actually happened was far more significant than a few favorable tweets or cable news appearances. What happened was the moment when a significant portion of American conservatives effectively declared that competent governance had become so foreign to their experience that they had to look literally to a foreign country to find it. Mark Carney didn't seek American political attention. He wasn't running for American office or attempting to build an American political coalition. He was simply doing what competent leaders do, governing with consistency, communicating with clarity, and maintaining institutional respect even under pressure. The fact that these basic leadership qualities caused such a stir among American political observers tells you everything you need to know about how far American political culture has fallen. Let me walk you through how this phenomenon developed, because it didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't driven by any single dramatic moment. Instead, it emerged from the cumulative contrast between Canadian institutional competence and American institutional chaos. When Canadian officials dealt with trade disputes professionally, while American officials turned every negotiation into theater, people noticed. When Canadian economic policy remained predictable, while American policy swung wildly based on social media outbursts, people noticed. When Canadian leadership maintained dignity under pressure, while American leadership seemed to thrive on manufactured crisis, people noticed. The conservative admiration for Carney wasn't based on ideological alignment. Many of the Americans praising him disagreed with his specific policy positions. What attracted them was something more fundamental: the recognition of what institutional competence looks like when it's been absent from your own system for so long that you've almost forgotten it existed. Think about what it means for lifelong Republicans to openly express more confidence in a Canadian Liberal than in their own party's leadership. This isn't policy disagreement. This isn't partisan disappointment. This is institutional abandonment. When conservatives begin looking outside their own country for examples of the leadership qualities they once expected from their own representatives, something has broken that can't be fixed with electoral cycles or messaging adjustments. The psychology behind this cross-border political admiration reveals something uncomfortable about American political culture that extends far beyond any single administration or party. We have created a system that rewards performance over competence, drama over deliberation, and immediate gratification over long-term institutional health. Carney's approach offered a stark contrast to that culture, and the contrast was so sharp that it appeared almost revolutionary. What made Carney particularly attractive to American observers wasn't charisma or ideological purity. It was boring competence, the ability to address complex problems without turning them into personal grudges, the capacity to communicate policy decisions without attacking the legitimacy of democratic institutions, the discipline to maintain professional standards even when dealing with unprofessional counterparts. These used to be baseline expectations for democratic leadership. Now they look like extraordinary achievements. The most revealing aspect of the Carney phenomenon was how it exposed the gap between what American conservatives claimed to value and what they actually rewarded. For years, conservative rhetoric emphasized institutional respect, constitutional norms, and professional governance. But when those qualities were demonstrated by a foreign leader while being systematically abandoned by domestic leaders, the response wasn't loyalty to party or country. It was admiration for competence wherever it could be found. This represents a profound crisis of legitimacy that extends far beyond electoral politics into the foundations of democratic governance. When citizens begin to trust foreign leaders more than their own elected officials, it's not just a reflection of poor candidate selection or temporary political disappointment. It's a signal that the entire system of democratic accountability has broken down so completely that competence has become foreign by definition. From Canada's perspective, the American admiration for Carney created an unusual diplomatic situation. Canadian officials found themselves managing not just the traditional challenges of dealing with an unpredictable southern neighbor, but also the complications of having their own leaders become symbols of what American leadership used to represent. This wasn't a role Canada had sought, and it came with risks as well as benefits. The benefits were obvious: enhanced international credibility, stronger relationships with key American constituencies, and the soft power that comes from being seen as a model of institutional competence. But the risks were real too. When foreign admiration becomes a substitute for domestic political legitimacy, it can create expectations and dependencies that are difficult to manage over time. What American conservatives found in Carney wasn't just an alternative leader. They found a reminder of what they had lost and perhaps didn't even realize they were missing: the ability to disagree with someone's politics while still respecting their competence, the capacity to trust that institutions will function predictably even when you dislike their outputs, the confidence that leadership decisions are based on analysis rather than impulse. The tragedy of this situation is how avoidable it was. The qualities that made Carney attractive to American observers aren't exotic or impossible to replicate. Institutional respect, professional communication, and policy consistency are learnable skills that used to be considered basic requirements for democratic leadership. The fact that they now appear exceptional reveals how far American political culture has drifted from its own stated values. The media coverage of conservative admiration for Carney consistently missed the deeper implications of what was happening. Instead of treating it as a curiosity or a temporary political realignment, it should have been understood as a warning signal about the health of American democratic institutions. When significant portions of the electorate begin looking outside their own system for examples of competent governance, it's usually a sign that internal reform has become impossible through normal political channels. This dynamic also revealed something important about the relationship between national identity and political legitimacy. American conservatives didn't stop being patriotic when they began praising Canadian leadership. They maintained their commitment to American principles while acknowledging that those principles were being better demonstrated by foreign leaders. This distinction between love of country and support for current leadership is crucial for understanding how democracies can maintain legitimacy during periods of institutional crisis. The international implications of this phenomenon extend far beyond North American relations into questions about democratic credibility in an interconnected world. When the world's most powerful democracy begins producing leaders that its own citizens find less trustworthy than foreign alternatives, it undermines not just American influence, but the entire model of democratic governance that America has promoted globally for decades. From an institutional perspective, the Carney phenomenon demonstrates how quickly political legitimacy can migrate when traditional sources of authority fail to maintain basic standards of competence. This isn't just about individual politicians or temporary policy disagreements. It's about the erosion of the institutional norms and expectations that make democratic governance possible in the first place. What's particularly striking about this situation is how it revealed the hunger among American conservatives for exactly the kind of leadership they had been taught to expect from their own system. The admiration for Carney wasn't based on a desire for Canadian-style policies or institutions. It was based on a recognition of leadership qualities that American institutions were supposed to produce, but had somehow stopped cultivating. The long-term consequences of this institutional collapse are still unfolding, but they're already visible in the way American political discourse has adapted to the absence of shared standards for leadership competence. When basic institutional functions like truthfulness, consistency, and respect for democratic norms become partisan issues rather than shared expectations, the system loses its capacity for self-correction through normal political processes. As I reflect on the broader implications of American conservatives turning to a Canadian leader for examples of competent governance, what strikes me most is how unnecessary this crisis was. The institutional frameworks for producing effective democratic leadership still exist in America. What's been lost is the political will to maintain the standards that make those frameworks functional. The Carney phenomenon offers both a warning and an opportunity. The warning is clear. When citizens begin looking outside their own democratic institutions for examples of competent leadership, those institutions are approaching a point of no return. The opportunity lies in the recognition that competence, consistency, and institutional respect remain valued qualities that can be restored if there's sufficient political commitment to restoration rather than further destruction. What this moment ultimately reveals is that democratic legitimacy isn't automatic or permanent. It requires constant cultivation through leaders who understand that their primary responsibility isn't to their own political survival or ideological purity, but to the institutional health of the system they've been entrusted to manage. When that understanding disappears, competence becomes so rare that it has to be imported from abroad.